Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Malkin Fund, May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and my guest today is Dr. Jonathan Fanton, American historian and university president who for the past decade has led the huge, the prestigious, the excitingly innovative John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Now, a number of foundation chieftains have joined me here at this table over the past half century and more, in conversation about their challenges and opportunities, about their programs and plans, about the very American quality of foundations themselves. Dean Rusk, George Harrar, John Knowles, and Peter Goldmark, all presidents of the Rockefeller Foundation, have been here on The Open Mind at one time or another. So have Carnegie Corporation presidents John Gardner, David Hamburg, and of course Vartan Gregorian. And Russell Sage Foundation President Eric Warner, Ford Foundation President Franklin Thomas, Revson Foundation President Eli Evans, and the Open Society Institute's Ari Nair and George Soros have discussed the foundation world here as well, all striving to make a difference with their resources, as they inevitably do. Yet even as my guest prepares this year to conclude his own decade presiding over the MacArthur Foundation, the resources of all who give and get have been diminished. And today I would first like Jonathan Fanton to expand upon his letter to the editor in the New York Times some weeks back, when he stated that foundations should maintain, even increase their giving in difficult economic times. The issues the MacArthur Foundation confronts at home and abroad, human rights, conservation, and affordable housing preservation, among others, grow more, not less urgent when the global economy is in recession. The thrust to what my guest wrote then, of course, was quite direct. The MacArthur Foundation's endowment has declined this year, yet we remain committed to being a long-term, steady partner to organizations we support. We chose to maintain our grant-making levels in past recessions, and we intend to do so again now. But I would ask Dr. Fanton whether most other foundations are likely to do the same. Indeed, Dr. Fanton, can they?
Well, my guess is most foundations, big ones, will stay the course at least through '09. I think a real test will come in 2010 and beyond. MacArthur, and you well stated our position, believes that we have an obligation to the issues we work on and to the people and organizations we support to be there for them at a time of need. We made a lot of growth in our endowment over the past few years, and now we're giving some of it back, but that seems only right. We've also set aside a modest special fund on top of our normal giving to help grantees with particular difficulties in the year ahead.
What do you anticipate is going to happen to not just your grantees, but grantees around the country and around the world? Because, of course, you reach out beyond national borders.
Well, MacArthur wants to be a steady force and wants to calm things down.
calm things down. It seemed to me you stir things up.
Well, we stir things up in the work we do, but at this moment when people are anxious, they need to look at some institutions they can trust and count on. And I'm very careful about not aggregating anecdotal information and leaving the impression that organizations we support are in free fall or stepping back from the front lines of human rights in Nigeria, conservation in Peru, women's health in Mexico, and all the other good things we do. I think it's time to just keep our senses about us, realize this will go on for a bit, but we'll come through it, and to be happy that our grantees are resilient, flexible, adaptive organizations which can grow, but also continue to do good work with fewer resources. And our job is to cushion the impact of the recession both here and abroad.
You know, years ago I asked Peter Goldmark very pointedly about, I don't even know quite how to put it. I didn't then, and I don't know that I succeeded very well, but I was thinking about the role that major foundations play in taking positions, supporting positions that the elected representatives of the American people do not take. Maybe you're not going to have to worry about that now in the Obama years. But what about that strange combination of foundations moving in one direction and government moving in another?
Well, MacArthur, while based in the U.S., is a global institution, so we're looking at governments all over the world, not just in the U.S. We take the long view. We're not working on an issue just for tomorrow, but for 10 years from today. As we think about our role in public policy, which is what you're asking, I'd say there are 4 or 5 elements to it. The first is to get the question right, to approach a question in a fresh and different way. For example, we supported Brookings and Harvard and Stanford on the cooperative threat reduction program, which resulted in the Nunn-Lugar legislation that was a cooperative venture between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in reducing dangers of weapons of mass destruction, reducing stockpiles. We do research that comes up with solid, objective evidence that can be used to influence policy. We have research networks on complicated issues like adolescent development and juvenile justice. This network some years ago did path-breaking work, I think proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that kids are different developmentally. Their ability to reason and competence to make judgment matures not at 15, but in the later teens. And it was this path-breaking work that was cited in the Supreme Court case of Roper v. Simmons that outlawed the death penalty for children under 18, as an example. Model demonstration projects would be a third way in which we can influence policy. For example, take us now out to the South Pacific, where MacArthur works on conservation, as we do in 30 countries around the world. Very important to encourage local people to be partners in conservation, and in this case, not overfishing around the shores of Fiji. And we put in place a model project that had local councils police the amount of fishing that was done. These are called locally managed marine areas, and from this little beginning in Fiji, there are now 7 countries and 250 sites all across the South Pacific where these locally managed marine areas are now in force. Another area, another way we help is to set norms, that is to say, to do the intellectual work that leads to the evolution of norms. And here an example would be the Commission on Humanitarian Intervention and State Sovereignty, which the country of Canada put together. We put some money into it, and this came up with the notion of the responsibility to protect, basically saying that when a country fails to protect its own citizens, or worse, is the aggressor. The responsibility to protect citizens rises up to the international community. And the UN adopted that at the summit in 2005 as a norm the world would try to abide by. And finally, we can affect policy by shows like this one, by supporting quality journalism, public television, getting good information that people can use in the belief that people, when they know the facts, they will choose their leaders and policies wisely. So in all those ways, I think we can be helpful, and none of them really is pinpointed to affecting a particular policy at a particular moment. Some of our grantees do that, but we take the long run.
Now, you can take the long run, I gather, because your founder basically said, I made the money, you make the decisions how to spend it.
Yeah.
Is that rare in American philanthropy?
I think it is rare, and you have it right. John MacArthur said, I made the money, you fellows figure out how to spend it. So the board has had the freedom over the years to decide what the most urgent problems are in places where we could add value.
You have the easiest answer then at hand to those who have been saying that foundations sort of spit in the eye of their founders. Let's take Carnegie, let's take Rockefeller, let's take the other industrial giants or robber barons, call them what you will, who have founded the major foundations of today.
Well, most of the wealth that has endowed these foundations comes from people who were really smart and themselves very attuned and alert to opportunities. So I think it's in the spirit of a Rockefeller or a Carnegie to imagine that they would have a point of departure, but they would imagine that the world would change, and if they were still living, they would be changing with that world.
That's a fascinating way to put it. Awful lot of conservative people in this country would take exception to that.
Maybe, but I think it's a mistake to line up foundations on a left to right political spectrum. That we don't see ourselves as left or right. We don't see ourselves as on a political spectrum. There are characteristics that we own up to. We're optimists. We believe that humankind can improve. We believe in fairness and transparency. We believe in stewardship, that every generation has an obligation to the future. We believe in opportunity and trying to help those less fortunate develop their talents. These don't strike me as left or right values, but as basic American values. And I would like to think that the work we do and the words that would come to mind when you hear the word MacArthur is objective, high-quality research, non-ideological, in the public interest.
You say non-ideological, right, and yet you also say you find this to be in the best tradition,
right,
of the American past. Now, I wanted to ask you about your own background as an American historian and how much it has played in your comfort level with what the MacArthur Foundation started to do 30 years ago and that you have continued over the past decade.
Well, as an historian, and you also have studied history, I believe in looking at the current moment in the arc of history and asking, where are we? I do think history comes in cycles. I read a book and used to teach it at Yale called Seed Time for Reform. It was a book about the 1920s, and it was a revisionist theory. The 20s were seen as a kind of arid period, not much going on, but this book argued that there was an enormous amount of experimentation happening at the state and local level, and that experimentation was seed corn for the New Deal when Franklin Roosevelt came to office. I think we've been in a period, in a way equivalent to that, in which a lot of good ideas have been brewing, have been experimented with at the state and local level that now will be drawn on as America enters what I believe will be a new period of reform.
Well, when New York's Mayor Giuliani sneeringly spoke about community organizer at the Republican convention, I didn't wonder then, but I wonder now what the relationship of the MacArthur Foundation will be to the new administration. After all, you're located in Chicago, you have a particular interest in community organization in Chicago. And how will the state from which our new president comes and what he has done with his life affect what you'll be doing?
Well, you mentioned our work in Chicago. It's community organizing. It wouldn't be the way I would describe it. We work intensively with most of the high poverty neighborhoods in Chicago, having made a 10-year commitment to work on all the issues that must work together in the same time: education, jobs, economic development, housing preservation, public safety, health, and all the rest. But this is not a theory that begins by saying community groups can do it alone. It's a theory that says community groups, government, the not-for-profit sector, the market forces all have to work together to bring these promising neighborhoods to a place where they can develop and open opportunity for their residents. And I would hope that the President-elect has looked at our work, which we do in partnership with the Local Initiative Support Corporation, not just in Chicago, but it's been taken as the Chicago model to a dozen other cities around the country. I would hope that he would be aware of that. I'm very happy to see that a number of grantees that MacArthur supported are assuming important positions in the new administration. The Secretary of Education is our CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and we've supported his work. Arnie Duncan, a fabulously talented leader. Sean Donovan, the new Housing Commissioner, has received MacArthur support both as an individual and then as his work as Commissioner here in New York for 15 years. Cecilia Munoz of the Council of La Raza is working on intergovernment affairs. Longtime grantee John Holdren, the new science advisor, was a trustee of MacArthur, and so it goes. We have a number of people in high places that have been supported by MacArthur, have worked with MacArthur, and in the housing field, for example, we brought a whole number of our grantees together 3 years ago to begin working on a set of policies that we would hope a new administration, whoever it would be, might embrace. So I think there is on the ready very specific, concrete, useful ideas that have been developed in this last 10-year period.
Of course, you remind me of what was said in the FDR days when Columbia University played such a large role in supplying people to the New Deal, and we called it the germ of Columbia, the germ of the notion, and it seemed to be just that. Intellectually speaking, do you think that the new administration will latch on to much that you have done, even beyond the personnel that you have mentioned thus far?
I'm hopeful that the new administration will take a different approach to the rest of the world. I'm hopeful that a spirit of partnership will reemerge. I'm hopeful that the work we've supported, articulated in an op-ed piece by George Shultz and Bill Perry and Henry Kissinger and Sam Nunn, calling for rekindling of the spirit of Reykjavik to get going on the nuclear disarmament issue. I'm hopeful that will be taken up by the new administration. I'd expect attention to climate change as a real issue, and that's important to us because we're preserving areas of high biodiversity around the world that are threatened by climate change. So, yes, I'm optimistic. I caution, as always, as you and I, as historians know, that expectations can run very high. The President-elect has to concentrate on the economic crisis to start with. And I would not favor pressing him on every issue on the 21st of January. I think I have confidence that he's putting a good team together. They will sort out their priorities, and that we will see over the next few years a number of these issues addressed. But I wouldn't expect all the questions we care about to be addressed in year one.
Fair enough. But in the year one, which issues would you press?
Well, I think the economy is the overwhelming concern, and I would remind him, if he were to ask, of the mistake that Franklin Roosevelt made. Remember, Franklin Roosevelt came to office, I'd say as a fiscal conservative, believing in balanced budgets, was very loath to do too much deficit spending, and the New Deal really didn't put enough into the stimulus package of that day until it was clear by, I think, 36 that it simply wasn't working, and then much more was put in, and of course the war came along, and so I would urge the President-elect not to be too cautious, to undertake the stimulus measures that are going to be required to get the economy moving, and be mindful, as I know he will be, that there's a long-term fiscal challenge that has our deficit mounts that we have to deal with, but that comes second.
But you know, I'm revising my documentary history of the United States, and will include the new president's inaugural address, of course, and many of the other speeches. But I went back and reread FDR's second inaugural address, which we think of in terms of a rendezvous with destiny. But I was astonished by the economic radicalism of that address. And when I think of what is being said now, what was said in the past election, and what the Obama to-be administration seems to be looking like, I'm astonished by the fact that FDR was so much more radical, at least in words, in 1936-37.
Than he was in 32.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he learned.
Well, and then...
and he learned. Yeah.
Well, he learned, but then much more radical than I think the president-elect seems to be, or his primary challenger, Senator Clinton, seemed to be.
Well, we'll have to see how that plays out. You ask about foundations and how we intersect with public policy, and I mentioned that we think long-term. There's not much we can do day to day, the first 100 days. That's not our role. But we have three related projects underway that will have some significance over time. And I'll tell you just real quickly, if I may. The first is a network, a research network, looking at the aging society, re-projecting the estimates of how long we're going to live, how much disability-free life we're going to enjoy going forward, and what implications longer life will mean for, on the positive side, what you and I can do as we get older, and on the challenging side, what the cost will be to Medicare, Social Security, and all the rest. That in turn will inform a second project. We've supported an expert committee at the National Academies to lay out the fiscal challenge this country faces even before the recent economic downturn, and it's stark. We're building up deficits at a very rapid rate. The baby boom generation living longer are going to press entitlement costs through the roof, and we will face within the next 20 or 30 years a truly unmanageable fiscal situation unless corrective action is taken within the next 10 years, and so on the watch of the next president. And the purpose of this expert commission and the National Academy's very careful vetting process is to lay it all out in a way the public and policymakers can understand and trust. And the third and final initiative we have going is a series of what I would call complex cost-benefit analyses that show that government programs that are well designed and well implemented actually save money. And we're so used to thinking of the interests of people in trouble and need as different from the interests of the rest of us. But I think that's a paradigm that will need to shift, and I hope will shift in the course of the new administration. I'll give you an example. Ned Gramlich did a study many years ago of kids in a federal preschool program in Ypsilanti, Michigan, called the Perry Preschool. And he followed those kids for 30, 40 years versus kids who were not in a federal preschool program. It was amazing to see how much better kids who had a modest investment in preschool training did with respect to graduating from high school and college, getting better jobs, paying higher taxes, avoiding welfare, committing fewer crimes. And when all was said and done, the public got a $17 return, inflation adjusted, for every dollar invested. And that pattern, which then turns on its head this notion that when you help poor people, it's just a tax burden on you, just isn't true. It's a wise investment. And we're doing studies in health and housing, community development, prisoner reentry, and I believe that same pattern is going to reveal itself. So people living longer, bigger entitlements, bigger social deficits, fiscal deficits coming up, but some hope that we can learn how to use our public dollars more wisely.
Dr. Fanton, my mother used to say, from your lips when she liked something to God's ear, so one might say from your lips to Barack Obama's ear. And that's all the time we have for this program. You've promised to sit there and wait and do a second program. Thank you for joining me today.
I've had a great time. Thank you for very good questions.
And thanks too to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time as well. And for transcripts of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to The Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York 10150. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Malkin Fund, May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.